So if you have not already done so, please mute yourself and turn off your cameras. And then I'd like to introduce our Director of Programs, Ms. Kathy.
Hello, good morning, everybody. This morning we have the pleasure of having Donald Drife with us to speak. And Donald has been studying native vegetation in Michigan for over 40 years and is a longtime member of the Michigan Botanical Club and a life member of the Michigan Audubon Society. Don is a retired machine designer. He graduated from Oakland University in 2014 with a BA majoring in English. He blogs at Michigan Nature Guy blog and presents programs about the natural world for local nature groups. Don also serves as the botanist for the Royal Oak Nature Society, identifying plants in the city's 2 nature parks. Today, Donald is going to speak with us and his topic is the milkweed community, more than monarchs. Everyone knows that the monarch butterfly and its need for milkweed plants so it can survive, but many other insects and some non-insects also make their home in the milkweed community. Join naturalist and photographer Don Drife as he presents a program on the organisms which feed on and among the different species of milkweeds and those that make passing visits. Welcome, Don.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I didn't make it out to the Meadowbrook Gardens this year. They look gorgeous, though, as they always do, but I unfortunately did not make it out there. The Writing and Rhetoric Department has a writing marathon, and often we'll have groups of people in the garden writing, which is kind of fun. And that's an event. They did not have it this year. Let me see if I can get all the assorted screens going. Did I manage to share the screen? No one's yelling at me, so I'm going to assume I did. So the milkweed community is a fascinating community. I've spent a lot of time hanging around milkweeds. I have some favorite patches. This happens to be one in my yard in Troy. These are all first-year plants. We seeded the plants in the fall. And the next year they had monarch larvae. They actually flowered and produced seed pods on their first year from seed. So milkweeds come pretty readily from seed, most of the species. This is a common milkweed stand up near Grayling. Another one of my favorite stands. You can see the jack pine in the background. And I've spent a lot of time just standing around that with a camera, just seeing what comes by. The fragrance is wonderful. Just beyond those jack pines is a Kirtland warbler area, so you could stand in the milkweed and take pictures and listen to Kirtland warblers calling. It was a good way to spend a morning. And this is the reason a lot of us grow milkweed plants. This is the monarch larva. So a lot of us are growing milkweed solely to help the monarch. So Michigan has 11 native species of milkweed. They're all in the genus Asclepias. And botanists always like their technical terms. So the pod is called a follicle. And I had to look it up because I figured the hair had on the seed had a name, and it's a coma. So it's always interesting to see what specialized names are out there. I am an English major, yes. So milkweed have a pretty specialized flower. They have the horns you see here, and the horns are coming out of the hoods, they call them, on the flower. The Pollen is found in the slits. And there's a hole there. And a insect will come and put a leg in there and pull out the pollen. And if it's not a big enough insect, they often get trapped and they can't free themselves. So you sometimes find trapped insects on milkweed flowers. So this is a section through a flower showing the pollen. It's a pretty specialized pollen group. The seed pods are pretty much the same on all milkweeds around the world. These pods densely packed with seeds, and the seed with a little fuzz on it that carries it on the wind. So like I said, we have 11 species of milkweed in Michigan. Some are quite rare, some are only known from single sites. But this one is found out throughout the state. It's the common milkweed. Very large, dense umbels of flowers, opposite hairy leaves with very short stalks. Has a warty pod. And this is found throughout the state and is probably our most common milkweed. It's not my favorite for the garden. I have it in my yard, but not in my formal garden. It reproduces by roots, so it can be quite aggressive in a garden. Smooth milkweed, or prairie milkweed, it's called, has a smooth pod. The leaves are smooth, and there's no stalk on the leaf. It's in southern Michigan, primarily in prairies. And I have it in the garden, but it has not done well. It set seed for the first time. I've had it for about 5 years, and this is the first year that it set seed. The swamp milkweed is my favorite for the garden. It's not quite as aggressive as the common. It has a finer leaf, not such a thick leaf. It's a little more delicate of a plant. They have smaller flowers. They're normally a little darker than common milkweed, but there's variation in that. And the pods stick straight up. It comes readily from seed. The plants move fairly well. So if you know somebody who has common or a swamp milkweed, you can usually get plants or seeds. This is a group of the color variations for the swamp milkweed. The white one is a cultivar called Ice Ballet. So you can get a white form, which is nice in the garden. The other thing a lot of people grow is butterfly weed. It's one of our few orange flowered native plants. There's also a lot of variation in the flowers. This is one stand near Grayling, had all these different flowers. The yellow and the bicolor are often available in nurseries. It likes a sandy soil. It is sometimes difficult to transplant. I have sandy soil in Troy, so it came readily from seed here. But I know a lot of gardeners who have struggled to get this going. It's the only milkweed in Michigan with alternate leaves. So there's just one leaf at each node. And it does not have milky juice. But the monarchs love it and will eat this. It's a shorter plant, maybe a foot and a half tall. So it does nice in the, looks nice in the garden, and that orange flower is nice. World milkweed is maybe a foot tall, is a tall one. I normally see them along expressways. So it has a whorl of very narrow leaves. The monarchs will eat it, but the monarch larva could defoliate a plant. So it has that white flower. I've had it in the yard here for a couple of years and it flowers, but it just doesn't seem to be quite happy and I can't figure out why. But this is one that's often available in nurseries. Poke milkweed is a woodland loving plant. I have it in my woodland garden. It's a loose umbel. The leaves are broad and pointed. And all of these milkweeds have the typical milkweed shaped flower and the typical pods. This is it in the woods. Actually, I shot these pictures Monday. So normally it loses its leaves pretty early. Has these smooth pods. So a lot of gardeners don't like it for that reason. They can start looking pretty ratty in the beginning of September or so. A lot of people just cut it down, which is fine. But it's a woodland plant, so it will grow in light shade. So you can grow this where you can't grow common milkweed. A non-native tropical milkweed or Mexican butterfly weed. It's an annual here. And some people don't like it. It will stay green longer and they think it keeps the monarchs around. We really don't have that much problem in Michigan. It's usually farther south they have this problem. Mine, if it's green in mid-September, I just cut the plant down. But it's an annual here, so you'll have to replant it every year. But it does have that nice bicolored flower and grows in a pretty wide soil type. So some of the insects that come to milkweed, there's a small milkweed bug and a large milkweed bug. The size of them actually overlap, but the small milkweed bug has that X pattern on the back, and the large milkweed bug just has a black band. They feed on the seeds of milkweed plants. They'll suck the juice of the plant. The adults sometimes will nectar at the flowers. And these are fairly common and generally not a pest in the garden. I think they're just kind of neat to have around. These are the different instars of the large milkweed bug. So insects have their exoskeletons on the outside. So for them to grow, they have to molt. So there are different instars. So that little one in the black circle, that's the first instar. And then on the left side is a second instar, in the middle is the third instar, and on the right is the adult instar and the third instar. So part of the fun of identifying bugs is knowing what stage you have, because they can look quite different as they develop. So it's always easiest to identify adult bugs. And these are all on milkweed seeds. So you can get quite a few of them on a milkweed plant, but they really don't do a lot of damage. The swamp milkweed beetle is another one. I usually see it in fairly small numbers. The adult and the larva feed exclusively on milkweed, not necessarily swamp milkweed, but that's the one they prefer. And so you'll find the larva usually kind of hidden under a leaf because they don't have a heavy ectoskeleton. They're soft at this stage. But the adults are gorgeous. They're maybe ½ inch long and usually in fairly small numbers. So they're, once again, not a garden problem. Soldier bugs are interesting. This is one of the predatory stink bugs. So it sucks the fluid from other insects, both as the colorful nymph shown here, and also as an adult. So that adult, unfortunately, has a black swallowtail larva. And it got to it before I discovered it. I usually leave them in my garden. You know, they're part of the natural world. And if my garden is well enough balanced, then yeah, I'll lose a few larvae, but it's part of the natural world. The eggs are interesting. They look like little golden pots with a fringe on top. That's a wire on my tomato cage in my vegetable garden. That's where we found the eggs. So they're tiny eggs, and they're absolutely gorgeous when magnified. The red-blue checkered beetle is common on flowers in meadows and fields, and it feeds on small insects and pollen. The one in the circle in the upper left corner, you can see the pollinia on its foot. There's two yellow kind of U-shaped pollinia. So it had got into a milkweed flower and pulled itself free. They're parasitic on the larva of leafcutter bees. So they'll go into a nest of a solitary leafcutter bee and actually lay their eggs on the larva of the bee. But once again, there's not that many of them, and you know, they're part of nature. There's a whole group of milkweed beetles. They're bright red to reddish orange with black spots. They're longhorn beetles. The larvae feed on milkweed roots and the adult on milkweed plants. Different species of the beetles tend to favor different species of the milkweed, but you can find all of them on common or swamp milkweed. So the red-femered milkweed beetle has smaller black spots, but it has those whitish rings on the antenna. And the blackened milkweed beetle has a large black spot and very faint rings on the antenna. And then the red milkweed beetle, which is the one I see the most, has black antenna and then those 6 spots on the body, the bigger pair in the middle. So they're all pretty distinctive species. Do you see them? A little gray tree frog hiding in plain sight. It's a great color match for the seed pods. And I've seen these quite a few times. So the gray tree frog will change color. So it's in its green form here. If it gets on a green leaf, it takes it probably about a day to go from gray to green. You can see on the close-up a little gray on the underside of the sky. But I had a book on the milkweed community and it showed this tree frog. And I thought, the photographer put him there. But I've now seen him a couple dozen times on the milkweed. And they'll sit there for 8, 10 hours, just sitting patiently and taking whatever insect comes by. Quite an interesting little adaptation. This is a coral hair streak. Butterflies are frequent visitors, feeding or just resting on the milkweed. We could do a whole program on just the butterflies. So the hair streaks are fun. There's a half a dozen in Michigan. So these are the coral, banded, and striped hair streaks. The patterns are a little different on the wings. How long the tails are is another characteristic, but generally is the orange lined on both sides with black, or just one side? Does it have kind of the white stripes on it? I photograph them during the year, and then one night in the winter, I'll sit down and look at all the hair streak photos and identify them, because I can't keep them all straight. But they're maybe 3/4 of an inch long. There's dainty little butterflies. Northern crescents, we see quite a bit on the milkweed. So that's maybe a 1.25 inch wide butterfly. And like I said, there's quite a few butterflies. We could do a program just on the butterflies of the milkweed community. The golden aphid, or oleander aphid, is native to the Mediterranean. It has spread into the entire US and Canada. And the North American populations are parthenogenetic. It means they can reproduce without males for most of the years. So the females kind of give live birth to other females. So like the monarch and some related butterflies, these aphids pick up the cardiac glaucides from the host plant and deposit them in their body. So there's not a lot of things that eat this aphid, because it's supposed to be bitter tasting. The ants do tend it for the honeydew that they produce. And in the fall of the year, then they'll produce some winged males and some winged females. And the females will fly off and lay eggs, and the eggs are what overwinters. It's never really been a pest in my garden. Some people have them pretty heavily on the milkweed. The easiest way to control them is to wipe them off with a little soapy water when you first see them, so they don't get out of hand. Because like I said, they just divide, and they will divide rather quickly. The milkweed stem weevil. So the adults initially feed on the leaves, and then after feeding, the female weevils walk down to the lower part of the stem and chew several holes in the stem, and it creates this white scar. And then the females lay a single egg per hole. So those are multiple holes that the sap has seeped out of. So they'll lay in 1 egg per hole, and the egg, the larva develops inside the stem while feeding on the pith, the center of the stem. So ovipositor scar length is a good indicator of the number of eggs laid by an adult female. So in addition to feeding on the stems and leaves, the adults also feed on milkweed buds and pods. This can wipe out a stand of milkweed if they're dense enough. So if I've never seen more than 1 or 2 in my garden at a time, but if I started seeing half a dozen, I would probably be picking adults off of the plants. And you can tell how the plants are doing by how many of them are chewed up. So many of the members of the bee and wasp families visit the milkweed community. These are important native pollinators. So the milkweed nectar is one of the richest, highest energy nectars in the state. So the bees often come to it. So this is a splendid green metallic bee. It's a solitary bee. It nests underground. The golden digger wasp and the great black wasp are frequent visitors to milkweed. So they'll dig a burrow and go and capture a katydid, sting a katydid, and fly back to the burrow, deposit the katydid, and lay their eggs in the katydid, and the larvae develop in the katydid. They feed on the katydid, they pupate, and then the adults dig their way out of the ground. So I often see these on milkweed. Bumblebees are in trouble in this area. There's 46 species in the United States. They can be difficult to identify. These are our two common species. Impassions is the one I usually see in Michigan, and southern Michigan, and Tyrannus has that orange band, and that's generally in the north, but they are both found throughout the state. And there's various ideas as to just how the bumblebees are doing. So there's been a couple statistical surveys, and they show the numbers unchanged in the last 30 years. But I think I'm seeing fewer and fewer bumblebees. I used to have a nest almost every year, find a nest in my yard, and I haven't found one in recent years. Eastern carpenter bee. The slide, the video had one on a rose petal out at Meadowbrook. It looks a lot like a bumblebee, except the abdomen is hairless. They're solitary, so they don't make a nest like a bumblebee. And the females nest in a wooden structure. So they bore into my garage, and we kind of just coexist. So you get a 1/4-inch hole or so, maybe 6-8 inches deep. And that's what they'll use for a nest. I also have a large board, 4x8 board that I've drilled holes in, and they'll use that also, attached to a fence. And they're great pollinators. This is why I have beans this year, is they did most of the pollinating on my beans and my vegetable garden. The digger bees are kind of cool. I like the big eyes on them. Melissoides is another common name for them, which is the genus. And the females live in the nests. The males are kept outside of the nest. And so we will find every year we will find a congregation of 5 to 50 of the males. In the evening, they'll all congregate together on a plant, and they'll be there for a couple of days and then kind of move on. But they have that large eye. And these are also solitary nesting bees. So the males congregate together, but the females have their own nest holes, sometimes several together. Several nest holes in the same area, but it's always the same female, one female for each nest hole. And these are also performing a lot of the pollination in my vegetable garden. So a leafcutter bee. So they'll go out and they'll cut pieces of leaf, take them back to their nest, and they use the leaf to divide pollen. They'll pack the nest with pollen, cut a leaf, and they'll divide the cells. So they'll lay an egg in the pollen mass, then put it in a leaf, and then pack it again with pollen. So they also nest generally in existing holes in wood. This is another one that will move into my nesting block. So this one had an abdomen, it's a female, has an abdomen full of pollen and is filling up on nectar at a milkweed on their way back to the nest. So my wife and I found this strange looking thing, and we weren't sure what it was. The surface of the insect was covered with particles of sand, dirt, remains of other insects. And it was moving around on a milkweed leaf, eating eggs of some other insect. I'm not sure what type of eggs those were, but it was moving around, hoovering up insects, eggs. And you could see in this picture, you can faintly see the legs coming out at the base of that. And I refused to pick it up and take it apart to see what was underneath it. I try to keep my curiosity from destroying other creatures. And it took us a while, and we learned that it was lacewing. That was a lacewing larva, a good aphid eater, and the developing one is an aphid eater. It has these cool little eggs, look like heads of pins. That's on the underside of a swamp milkweed. So those stalked eggs. So they'll develop on the milkweed, and then the larva will go and feed on aphids and eggs of other insects. They will take a monarch egg, unfortunately. Ailanthus webworm moth. This is a neat little moth, maybe 3/4 of an inch long. It's native to the United States, but its food plant in Michigan is Ailanthus, is the tree of heaven. So it occurred in Florida, in northern Florida. And there was a Ailanthus relative down there that occurred there. Well, once we planted Ailanthus to its range exploded and it came north. It's a day-flying moth, and it's a really weird-looking little moth. I've had people who are not naturalists point it out to me because they think it's so bizarre looking. I am a day-flying moth addict, I'm sorry. This is a great plume moth. It's maybe an inch in diameter, or inch in wingspan, has those neat spines on it, and often comes in to feed on the milkweed nectar. The clearwings are fun. These are also day-flying moths. They mimic wasps. The viburnum clearwing one on the right has a pollinia hanging off of its lower right leg. So it's been in a milkweed and gotten away. And so they pull the pollinia out, and then when they move on to another flower, if they put that leg in, it pollinates the plant. It pollinates the flower. So you tell them apart by the pattern on the tail, for lack of a better term, and on the antenna, and also just how clear the pattern of the black is on the wings. So we probably have a dozen species in Michigan, and always fun to find. The milkweed tussock's moth. It's a common eater of milkweed plant. It will only feed on milkweed. They lay the eggs in mass. So you get a mass of caterpillars feeding on a milkweed. They will skeletonize a leaf. They eat everything but the veins of the leaf. So they'll skeletonize a leaf and move on. And when they reach their final instar, they're actually a pretty little, pretty looking larva. The moth they turn into is pretty nondescript, has a little orange on the underside. But it's pretty much just a gray moth. I like the larva better. The Virginia toucan moth. This guy is caught in the milkweed flower. He was trying to pull himself loose. He had a leg caught in that slit. I did let him go. And I say it's he, because this is a male. It has that feathered antenna. So on most moths, the male antennas are feathered and the females are straight. So the males have to detect the scent of the female. So the male generally flies to the female on these. The candy stripe leaf hopper and the partridge bug, there's a whole bunch of different leaf hoppers that hang out on milkweed. Some are brightly colored, some are not. They're difficult to identify to species. You generally have to have them dissected under a microscope, but I just enjoy finding them. They're really different looking insects. A wasp-manted fly. It's not a wasp. It's not related to praying mantis, and it's not a fly. It's a really unique insect. I've only found them a couple of times. They come into milkweed flowers and they're eating the insects that fly into the milkweed flower. So they look a lot like a praying mantis. So recently a Facebook friend posted what they thought was a picture of a praying mantis, and it was this rare insect. And I couldn't find it by the time I got over there. They lay their eggs in spiders. So they prey on spiders. And they're just these really cool insects. And like I said, I think I've seen 3 in my life. And it's always just thrilling to find them. There's a whole group of spiders who come into the milkweed. This is a goldenrod crab spider. This is also another spider that will change color. So if you put it on a yellow flower, it will turn yellow in about 24 hours. If it's on a thistle, it will attempt to turn purple. It doesn't do purple as good as yellow or black. And so the large spider there is the female, and the smaller one on her abdomen is the male. So most spiders have that much difference in sizes between female and male spiders. So most spiders that people see are actually female spiders. They don't see the smaller males that much. It's even marked differently. And he's probably hanging out on her back waiting for her to catch something so he can share in the meal. So the goldenrod crab spider does not make a web. So it's a hunting spider. So it grabs an insect with those long legs and then bites it, puts venom into it, and then sucks the juices out of the insect. You can see a leg of an insect sticking out of the milkweed flower on the left. So I don't know if an insect was caught there and actually pulled a leg off trying to get out, or if it was caught there and the goldenrod crab spider took care of it. I don't see any. Usually there's a little remains there when they've sucked the juices out of an insect. So I suspect that somebody lost a leg in one of these flowers. Nursery web spiders you often see, though they're also a hunting spider. When they make a web, it's for a nursery. So they will bite the base of a milkweed leaf, make it curl up, and then tie the edges together with their silk and lay their eggs inside. And this is a group of spiders getting ready to move on. And when they're about this size, they'll leave the nursery, and they're ballooning spiders. So they'll climb up to the top of the milkweed and let out a parachute of silk and float off in the wind. This is an American painted lady. A lot of people confuse these with monarchs somehow. Monarchs are heavily striped. They don't have blue spots on them. These are smaller than monarchs. These are maybe 1.5 to 2 inches across the wings, but it's still a pretty butterfly. This is the monarch look-alike, the viceroy. And it has that band on the hind wing. Yeah, the band across the hind wing that the monarch lacks. It's a little smaller than a monarch. And this is the monarch. So you see it lacks that band on the hind wing. It's a little bigger. So the worldwide distribution of the monarch is interesting. It started out in North America and South America. So in North America, it gets as far north as milkweed gets. And then there are other species of milkweed in South America, south of this range. But there's also a southern monarch that is occupying that niche. So it doesn't go a whole lot further south than this. In the 1860s and 70s, they found their way to Hawaii. They found their way to Australia, and we're not quite sure how. There's some islands in the Atlantic off the coast of Africa that they're on. There's some islands in the Indian Ocean that they're on. And all the ones outside of North America are non-migratory. So we say the monarchs are going extinct. Well, they're not. The migratory monarchs might be going extinct. What we might lose is the monarch migration, which is the fascinating thing about them. The monarchs over in Spain, Portugal, Monaco, that mouth to the Mediterranean, there's no native milkweed over there. There's an invasive milkweed that has come in. So they're trying to wipe out the milkweed, but the range keeps expanding of the milkweed and the monarch. And with the experience that I have with wiping out endangered or invasive species, I think the monarch's got a pretty good hold there. I don't think they're going to be wiping that milkweed out. It's got too firm of a hold. So monarchjourneynorth.org is a great site. So our monarchs winter in Mexico. And then in the spring, they come north into southern United States and they breed again. So we generally get the second generation monarchs in Michigan, are the first monarchs to get here. They'll generally raise a brood or two in Michigan. And then in August, they'll start migrating south. So it's usually the fourth generation that's going south. And some of them breed down in Oklahoma on their way to Mexico. Some of them go directly to Mexico. So it's often the 5th generation that goes down to Mexico. So somehow they know to migrate north. It's rather remarkable that this happens. So you have 4 or 5 generations of monarchs. And the problem is if something goes wrong with the breeding in one of these areas, then the population crashes. So I have to successfully breed 4 or 5 times for the population to go up. So it's a scary to look at the population of these, to look at the dynamics. So they winter in Mexico. They come north. Usually they stop in the southern United States. A few years ago, there was a big storm that came across Mexico from the Pacific. And in the middle of May, we had monarchs in the Upper Peninsula. They blew that first generation all the way up. And the milkweed was just coming out of the ground. But they made it all right. But normally they come south to that spring area and then work their way north to breed in Michigan. So there's a resident population, a non-migratory population in the south part of Florida. There's a wintering population in California that has not been doing well. And we do know that some of the eastern tagged monarchs have ended up in the wintering population in California. So we do know that there's some gene flow across that. But just this whole dynamic, when we look at something like a bald eagle, where an adult will live 20 years, if it doesn't breed 1 year, it's not a disaster. So a lot of the adults stretch through the DDT era of eagles and could breed again. But if you can't breed 4 times for a monarch, your population's in trouble. So the right side is a monarch egg. On the left is some dried sap. They look quite a bit alike. I get fooled by them until I take a closer look and look for that ribbing. The egg close-up is rather pretty, actually. So they lay an egg in 4 to 6 days, depending on the temperature. They hatch. The first thing the young does is eats the rest of the egg casing. And then it generally makes a hole in the leaf. That scale on the upper right corner, those are 1 millimeter marks. So that's a millimeter, about a 1/16 of an inch. That's 2 millimeter long, or about a 1/16 of an inch long. They go through 5 instars in 10 to 16 days. So every time they grow, they have to shed the skin. So each instar looks slightly different. So these are getting up toward the final instar. That's a final instar. You can often find them by looking for the frass, the droppings on a milkweed. When I walk into a milkweed stand, I'll look and see, have the plants been eaten? And often I'll find an eaten milkweed and the larva will have moved on to an adjoining plant, but you can tell if they're in the area or not. Then they'll spin a little silk, they'll hang down, and the skin splits along the head. And they split off the skin and they form a chrysalis. So they're green or brownish. They have these gold dots on them. This one's on a group of big blue stem grass. And I always forget how small these things are. You know, they're at most 3/4 of an inch long. So 9 to 14 days, again, depending on the temperature. They're in the chrysalis. Just before they emerge, the chrysalis thins and gets clear. And you can see the butterfly inside. And then they push their way out and they hang on the chrysalis, and they have to pump the fluid out of the wings. So they'll emerge in maybe 30 seconds. So this one was one that we raised, and my wife and I took turns standing next to the chrysalis for 5 hours, waiting for it to emerge. Because we were going to call the other one, we didn't realize how quick they were. And I managed to get pictures of them. So there's a fluid in the wing that drains off. You can see the scales in the wings of a fresh butterfly. And so they'll pump out the wings, and this one is close to being able to fly. This is a male monarch on goldenrod. The male monarchs have those scent glands, that black spot toward the center of the insect. There's 2 black spots. The females are not as brightly colored. So this is a composite. So the female on the left has a little whiter black bands. It's not quite as bright orange. And they tend not to have the bright orange spots that the male has. And the male has those narrow, well-defined black bands on orange and the scent glands. So this is the overwintering population in Mexico. So they go down with aerial photos, they estimate the area of trees. They would feel good about having 8 hectares of area. We haven't hit 8 hectares in years. So the population swings quite a bit. I don't have there's no indication as to what next year's will be. They usually release the data in February or March. So we're always curious as to what's going on with them. This is the Thanksgiving count in California. And they went from 1.2 million, which was down from earlier counts. There were probably 4 or 5 million butterflies there in the 50s. In 2020, they had 2,000 adults. So it is kind of devastating. Just some quick websites. If you go to my Michigan Nature Guy page and search for monarchs, you will find all these links. Bug Guide is what I use for identifying insects. You can post pictures and they'll identify them for you. It's a fabulous site. The Michigan Flora website is there, has all the plants that grow wild in Michigan and photos of most of them, keys for identification, range maps telling you where they're found in the state. It's a fabulous resource for identifying plants. There's a lot of information on monarchs. The National Wildlife Federation site is good. Joint Venture has a lot of good information, particularly on the life cycle. Monarch Watch, you can buy tags from them. I have seen one tagged monarch in my travels. The tree search from the federal government, that is an excellent publication on propagating milkweeds. From seed, from cuttings, from dividing roots. Yeah, I've mentioned Journey North again. And then just general books for identification of things in Michigan. Brenda's Raising Butterflies in the Garden is excellent if you're interested in gardening and butterflies. That's kind of a must book to have. Larry Weber's Spiders of the North Woods. You can't get a better name for an author of a spider book than Weber. The whole, there's a whole series of Northwood guides, and they're all excellent. That is my blog. Like I said, links are there for all of the literature I cited that I kind of ran through at the end. And that's about it for me. So are there questions in the chat?
There are, Don, as a matter of fact. First off, Jane said, nice slideshow, 3 exclamation points. Nice slideshow. That was Jane from before. Jane then did add, Don, your presentation is magical, which I have to say, your photographs are phenomenal.
Well,
Connie wanted to know, Connie wanted to know, will carpenter bees make nests in wood laying flat on the ground?
They will. So I had a, well, I'll leave logs in my wood lot. And I found one of them nesting in the end of about 4-inch diameter log. And they had burrowed into the end of it. You can't get them wet. So they have to be high enough up to stay dry. But yeah, they'll nest on the ground.
I'll do anything so they're not nesting in my house. Mary wanted to know, can years of lower monarch counts be explained by or associated with other environmental occurrences?
There have been many PhDs written on this question. Climate change seems to be the biggest factor. So the climate, you can look at some years. So one year we knew when they came up into Oklahoma, the nest on the way north, that they were snowed on. The weather extremes in their Mexican wintering grounds are more. So one year, maybe about half of the insects had left and they got down into the 20s, which is unheard of there. And there were millions of dead butterflies on the ground. So sometimes we know and sometimes we don't. It's very difficult to predict. I've had years, or I had 1 year that I did not find a larva in Michigan. And the next year, the count was down. I have not seen as many as I usually do this year. So I'm curious as to what the count is, but we can send a lot of them south. And, you know, if something happens on the way to Mexico, you know, it's a very interesting dynamic. And what is causing the numbers in California, we have no idea. Some people suspect pesticides, but we don't have any proof of that. You know, the dead insects didn't have any of the toxins in the bodies, but we don't know what's causing it. Planting milkweed is part of the answer, but I see a lot of stands of milkweed without larvae, so we're not anywhere near the carrying capacity of the larvae, you know, of the plants. So I still have, have stuff in the, I still have them in my yard. I didn't get any larvae in the yard this year, which usually I do. So it's kind of a mystery. Monarch Journey North will have some of the technical papers and some synopsis that are pretty readable if you want to see more.
Grace said, excellent presentation. Jane said, I think eggs and early instars are pre. There might be more to that. Jane, I'll give you a second if there's more to that. I have two questions, actually. One of them, and it's only because I don't think I tracked it myself. I've got different types of milkweed that grow around my property. Are all of them fragrant?
Yes.
All of them are fragrant. Okay. And then I have another.
Some more so than others, but they all have that high sugar content in the nectar, and that's what gives them the fragrance. The world milkweed is not so fragrant, but most of the other ones are. When you can find a big stand of milkweed because you smell it before you get to it, that's fun.
Yeah. And we have sections on our property like that. So that's another question I have. So I have a lot of that common milkweed that's growing in a spot that probably I don't really want that much of it, but I can't bring myself to really eradicate it. So it's still growing out there. Do you just leave it up year round? I mean, some of them, I do pull some out. Do you just leave it standing year round?
I do leave some year round.
I mean, does that benefit those, all of the insects and the bugs that are still around?
Yeah, and there's some insects that will lay eggs in the stems, and some of the solitary bees will hibernate in the stem. I pull some of mine very carefully to try to keep it controlled, and also the younger shoots they prefer. So this keeps generating younger shoots throughout the year. So we pull them and then look them over really well for eggs. And if all of a sudden we find an egg, we're raising monarchs that year. We have just committed to, 4 weeks of feeding monarchs.
It's funny how the guilt comes and gets you, doesn't it? It's always a science project. Jane finished our question. I think eggs and early instars are predated. Predated. Predatory insects decimate eggs and larvae in my yard.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. So how nature accommodates that is a monarch, a female will lay 600 to 1,000 eggs. So if you lose some to predation, that's all right. That's why a lot of people, gather the eggs and raise them. You'll get a lot more bringing the insects into captivity where you can keep them.
Your own nursery.
Okay, I got the chat up now.
Oh, okay.
So
You got it. We're down to Mary's. Can milkweed ever be grown successfully in large pots?
Yes, and I have a lot of friends who do that. So I have a friend who has in an apartment in Royal Oak and has common milkweed and monarchs on his 3rd floor patio. And I've heard different things about overwintering them then. Mm-hmm. So I have one friend who takes them out of the pot and winters the tubers. I have another friend who sinks the pot into their vegetable garden and digs it up in the spring. Mm-hmm. And then I had some in a pot, quite by accident. I didn't plant anything in the pot that year, and there must have been seed in it. And so it's wintered a couple of years. It's just on the ground in my garden. And so I haven't done anything to it, and they're pretty. The common is pretty hardy.
That's interesting. Pat said thank you. Are there any other questions floating around out there. Even if you want to unmute to ask your question instead of typing it into the chat, we'll certainly let that happen as well. So Don, this was really a great presentation. Thanks for sharing all of your enthusiasm. Your pictures are phenomenal. The knowledge that you have, just really great and easy to understand. So I just want to say, you had mentioned in here the struggle the bees are having locally. Our next presentation is going to be Elizabeth Crowder with her presentation called Bees in the D's. Oh, what are you laughing about, Don? What do we need to know now?
Elizabeth is good.
All right, we've already got a 1 thumbs up
Yeah.
from Don. So President Margaret, do you have anything else, or Kathy, to mention?
I would like to add my thank you as well. It was beautifully done. Very, very informative. And can we get him back again?
I think he has several topics that we could probably pull from his vast knowledge.
Good plan. Good plan. Thank you.
If everybody does really well voting on the election ballots, maybe we can come up with a list of topics that Don can speak on.
Oh yeah. I'll just put together a talk for you guys. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. We'll just, yeah, because we're going to practice voting online. So
Good.
I've got to get out and see the garden next year. How
Are
many
you-
annuals do you guys put in? Do you have any idea?
Nikki knows the answer.
I mean, I was looking at those pots going, how on earth did they do this?
I have an answer, but I'd have to go do some digging. I can look it up. That would be a fun fact. I can find out.
maybe we should have trivia at each meeting. We could have
Oh,
Meadowbrook trivia to open
I
it up.
love it.
Yeah, we can make this up really well.
Don, it happens because of all of these names you see up on the screen.
yeah.
It's a great troop. So, all right. Well, then I do believe that we'll wrap things up for today. President Margaret, I will let you close things out.
Thank you. And thank you again, Don. And you know, there's nothing wrong with you joining Meadowbrook Gardening Club. We would appreciate your expertise. And besides, we're really a fun group to hang out with.
It seems like it.
We are good. And I'd like to remind the membership one more time, there's still time to cast your ballot for officers. And everyone have a very nice holiday, and we'll see you in January. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.